Now, the word value means this: to rate at a high price or to have high esteem. What's something that you value? Maybe just shout it out, actually, or just say it loud enough that I can hear. I saw Dave pull the ultimate right there. He looked at his wife and said, "You, honey." Good work. That was a good job. What else do you guys value? Community? Okay, cool. What else? Yeah, give me a few. Nature? Good. Me too. Good friends. There you go. There you go. Physical activity. Yeah. Taste buds. Okay. All right. You must have just had coronavirus. I'm just kidding. Anything else that you value? Our pastor. Wow. Here's the interesting thing about value. Value is very much in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? Maybe a number of you have things that you value that somebody else doesn't. Or maybe you know somebody who values something that you don't. This series is about what the Vineyard values. Over the next 5 weeks, we're going to be talking about what I would call our core values. That is the things that ground us, the things that we come back to that we are. Not just things we'd like to be, but these things are in our DNA. They're just like when you see a great mountain bike and you're a mountain biker, you value it, you know? I got a new bike and it's a really cool bike. And I was in Breckenridge last week and I was pushing the bike and this little kid, he was like 12, he walks by and I saw him nudge his brother and goes, "Ooh, S-Works." Like he just had this like value for what I had, right? In the same way, these values that we're talking about at the Vineyard, for those of you that are new to the Vineyard, this is a good way to get to know us. And for those of you that have been around for a little while, these are like reminders. I would say this too, these values are not aspirational. They're not things we necessarily just want to be, that we're like, I'm going to beat you up to try to be this today. This rather is like a grounding talk. This is a talk where I sort of have my arm around your shoulders and I'm saying, hey, remember, this is who we are. Now, each week I want to teach you something about value, having value in things. And specifically, what I'm talking about is having a core value. And this week what I want to teach you is that when you know your core value, you can be centered. Now that's going to come out through our talk. But basically the idea is when you know what you value, the things that don't bring value to your life do not distract you as much as they do when you don't know what you value. Okay? So that will draw itself out and you'll see how that works. First, an analogy. Somebody said taste buds. Well, I've got a Yeti cooler here full of some things that I value. And I'm going to start with the thing that I value most, and this is the center of my talk. This is a steak, a big old slab of beef. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think about being hungry and wanting to satisfy my hunger, man, a steak is where it's at. Now, even more so, when I've been backpacking and I'm up in the woods, and I just, have been eating backpacking food, you boil the stuff and it's okay, but it's not great. This is what I'm dreaming about at night, right? This is when I'm in the woods, I'm like, all I want to do is go back and throw a steak on the grill and just mow it, chow down. This thing's probably like, this is heavy. This is probably like 30 ounces or something. That's what I'm thinking about when I'm backpacking. Now, the interesting thing about hunger is the more you have some of any kind of food, it lessens your hunger for maybe what you really care about. So I brought some other things here that I value and I'm hungry for, but maybe not so much as much, like Twizzlers. Anybody like Twizzlers? Yeah, okay, I don't really care for Twizzlers. Oh, that was a bad throw. Almost knocked somebody out. You can have those. Here's the interesting thing about Twizzlers. If you eat a Twizzler once, you're really happy, right? If you spend your entire life eating Twizzlers, you start to kind of feel like, man, I need something more substantial than that Twizzler, right? I got some other things. Fruit snacks. These are just things from my closet. Anybody like a fruits? All right, Lee, here we go. Oh, and that was bad. Okay, Nutri-Grain bars. Anybody want a Nutri-Grain bar? Again, like this is okay. It's got probably high fructose corn syrup, which is like the enemy in my family. Let's see what else I got. M&Ms. Who likes peanut butter M&Ms? Okay, watch out, Angela. Oh, snagged, taken. I got some Enstrom's toffee. Anybody like almond toffee? Lee. Oh, there we go. Oh, Bill has got the hand. Here, let me try again, Lee. Not as good, sorry. And then I got these are Block Party bars. Anybody know what a Block Party bar is? Remember these on the rafting trip? Oh, I'm going to leave those here for me. Here's the point. Today we're talking about hunger for God. And frankly, I recognize that hunger for God is a kind of a strange concept. What does it mean to be hungry for God? How do you even touch God that seems to be all around us, and yet at many times we can wonder, is he even real at all? What's it mean to be satisfied in our hunger from God? And for anybody who's been on any length of a spiritual journey, you know that one moment it can feel like he's there and everything is so real. And the next moment he can feel so distant and gone. And then there's confusion and disillusionment, right? Life happens. Things happen to us. Things happen to other people we love. And life of faith can be so undulating to where we can get to a place where we're like, what am I even hungry for anyway? We can get lost and dull. And Kyle, I love that you pointed out that we can just feel numb. We can get to a place where we know that God is real and that I probably should do something for him. But what does it mean to be hungry for him and connected to him? Well, today I want to tie this idea of one of the core values of the Vineyard, probably the cornerstone core value, is that we are a group of people that when you strip it all away, we are hungry for God. Not hungry for God to just sort of learn about him or hear about him, but hungry to experience and know him, to feel his love, to be touched by him, to be changed by him, to be in a place where we are connected to God. That's what we long for at the Vineyard. I love how somebody put it once to me. They said, oh, you guys at the Vineyard, you don't just talk about God, you expect him to show up when you go to church. And that's true. This is a place where we long to see God move. God is like that steak in our life. But the reality is there are so many Block Party bars and Nutri-Grain bars in our life. And I would say our hunger is so real that it is hard to get to a place where we can experience the steak, where we wait for the steak. You know, that steak takes time to thaw, to have it cook, you know? And sometimes it's just easier to grab a Nutri-Grain bar, but eventually the Nutri-Grain bar won't satisfy. It reminds me of a quote by G.K. Chesterton who said, every man that knocks on the door of a brothel is searching for God. It's kind of an interesting way to think about it. Now, G.K. Chesterton was around a long time ago. But basically he said, at our core level, all of us are hungry for God. It's just figuring out how to get in a place where we can hear him, taste him, and touch him. And today I'm going to try to bridge that gap, as impossible to me as that feels, because this is nothing like a formula. I mean, how do we connect with God? It feels like maybe the biggest question in life, and I'm going to try to address it in 15 minutes. But my hope is to just start a conversation together that spurs us on towards our desire, our equal desire for that steak. Today, we're going to look at a story from Luke 7. And this story is about a woman that comes to Jesus and does something ridiculous, something you would never do in public. And we get to this point where we find that this woman is in love with Jesus. Of course, not in a romantic way. She is desperate out of love to connect with Jesus. And as I read this story, I want you to ask yourself, where does this love come from? And where might I find that kind of love or hunger for God in my own life? All right? Let's read the story. So this is found in Luke 7. We're going to read out of the New Century Version of the Bible. There's a lot of versions of the Bible. This is the New Century one. Here we go. Verse 36. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him. So Jesus went to the Pharisee's house and sat at the table. You with me? Picturing the scene? Just try to imagine it. And a sinful woman in the town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. How do we know that she's a sinful woman? I mean, something about her reputation or her looks caused everybody to think of her with one word: she's a sinner. So she brought an alabaster jar of perfume, and she stood behind Jesus at his feet, crying. She began to wash his feet with her tears, and she dried them with her hair, kissing them many times and rubbing them with perfume. And when the Pharisee, who asked Jesus to come to his house, saw this scene that was happening before him, he thought to himself, if Jesus were a prophet, he would know that the woman touching him is a sinner. Jesus said to the Pharisee, Simon, I have something to tell you. Simon said, Teacher, tell me. And Jesus said, 2 people owed money to the same banker. One owed 500 coins, and the other owed 50. They had no money to pay what they owed, but the banker told both of them they did not have to pay him. Jesus does this massive shift in the conversation. Listen to what he says next. Which person will love the banker more? Simon the Pharisee answered, I think it would be the one who owed the most money. Jesus said to Simon, you're right. Then Jesus turned to the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? When I came into your house today, you gave me no water for my feet, but she washed my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. You gave me no kiss of greeting, but she has been kissing my feet ever since I came in. You did not put oil on my head, but she poured perfume on my feet. I tell you that her many sins are forgiven. So she showed great love. But the person who's forgiven only a little, will love only a little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. And the people sitting at the table began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? And Jesus said to the woman, because you believed, you are saved from your sins. Now go in peace. Quite the story, isn't it? Remember I started this conversation saying, what caused this woman to love Jesus? And we could say in another way, what caused this woman to be hungry for God? Ultimately, we're going to get to this pretty simple question. And that is, do you identify more with Simon the Pharisee or the sinful woman in the story? There's a few things in the story that I just want to draw up that I think are interesting. First, I kind of mentioned it already, but I find it so profound that this woman was labeled a sinner. I want you to think about how demeaning that must have felt to wear sinner on her skin. You know, in a world that was so religious, she was the one that was considered far from God, so much so that the religious people would not hang out with her. Now, maybe that's not too far from what you experience in our world today, but that should not be the case. In the people who followed Jesus, followed the scriptures, the poor should have been, or the sinful people should have been the ones that were most embraced. And instead, here you've got a woman who was a social outcast because she was a sinner. Now, we'd only be projecting if we guessed what she did to be called a sinner. but scholars kind of think she was a prostitute. And she was probably the woman of the town. Remember, they're in a little town. And so, it's probably an awkward moment for the people at the table, because prostitutes have to have paying customers to be prostitutes. And who knows if some of those paying customers were there at the table, right? This is where the society is breaking down right before its very eyes. And maybe you've seen this in our world in any number of ways, right? Where our world, the pressures and all the pompousness that keeps us separated from people just doesn't work, right? And it's a clash of all the worlds. And it's like everybody's on a level playing field before Jesus. And the Pharisees are not comfortable with that. By the way, the Pharisees in the day and age, they were the wealthy ones. They were the ones that owned the homes and had the social prominence. And they were also publicly known, but for being the good guys, And so here you have this woman the Pharisee whose house it is, feels like this woman's going to mess up his house. He wants her gone. And yet the Levitical law stated that anytime the religious people had a dinner together, they had to invite the poor and those who were suffering to eat the scraps from the table. So, he was left in this dilemma. And I love that the scripture pointed out that he was thinking in his mind, does Jesus know that this is a sinful woman? And I love that, because maybe it's not as supernatural as you think that Jesus called her out on it. He probably could read it on this guy's face, You ever felt when somebody else is uncomfortable, you can just see it all over them? That's all that's happening here. This man, as they say, is looking down his long nose at this woman, and he just is uncomfortable, right? And Jesus embraces this incredible show of affection. The second part I wanted to point out is this great phrase where Jesus says, who would love the banker more? Right? He pulls out this idea, this story, which is so classic Jesus, isn't it? He responds to a tense situation by telling a story. And he says, which person will love the banker more? Now, I think this is kind of interesting because he's changing the game. He's talking about money and then love. They don't usually go together. Let me just put it this way. When was the last time somebody asked you how much you love your banker? Like love at an affectionate heart kind of level, In our world, we try to separate these things. And yet, naturally, we're humans, and sometimes things cross over the veil to where doctors or any kind of number of positions, you can do something kind for someone and bridge that gap to a gap of love. It made me think about a football coach. Have you guys ever heard of Joe Ehrmann? There was a book written about him. In 2004, he was called the Coach of America. And I remember reading about it because a journalist who covered one of his high school games saw how he was treating the players and was so overcome by what he was doing that he wrote a book. He followed this guy around for a year and wrote a book about him. And I read the book, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And when I was reading this, I was just stirred in my memory of this story and how this man coached. So Joe Ehrmann was an NFL defensive end. I think he was a first-round draft pick for the Colts back in the day. And if you look at his picture when he played for the Colts, he was this big, imposing man. But if you learn his story, you find that he feels like everything that our culture was taught about masculinity, or like what it means to be a man, was missing what it took to actually function in life. And essentially, what he ended up doing is saying the most important thing in life, this coach is a believer, the most important thing in life is to love one another. And so I remember reading this book and reading about their huddles. They would do this before every single huddle. This is what they would say. The head coach would ask the team, "What's our job as coaches?" And the team would respond in unity, "To love us." And then the players would ask, "And what's your job?" to love each other. Every time they would get together, instead of doing 1, 2, 3, defense, or 1, 2, 3, kick there, it would be, what's our job? To love each other. In fact, he got into the habit, this man, of telling these students, every time he would coach them, he would say, I love you, son. And there's a story in the book that I reread about a young freshman who first went to football practice, and this coach looked him in the eye and said, son, I love you. And his first reaction was, what? That's not supposed to happen here. We're here to play football. And by the end, by the way, these guys have won so many state championships, and they have had such a profound influence on the field through love that it's like, that's why he was the coach of the year in America. I bring this up because I feel like it's such a parallel to what Jesus is doing here. He's essentially looking at the table and he's saying to the Pharisee, do you love this woman? And then alternatively, which I think is so helpful for us, he's saying, do you see how she loves me? We live in a world that is so void of emotion. And that's the next thing that stuck out to me about this story. The scripture says she stood there crying. Think about how it played out. She was so moved by emotion that she cried, and that her tears then got her cloth wet enough that she could actually wash Jesus' feet and then dry his feet with her hair. Now, I don't know much about the story, but one thing I can tell is she did not plan this, all right? You don't go into a moment where you're going to like do something for someone and say, okay, first I'm going to cry enough that my towel gets wet, and then I'm going to get on my knees and I'm going to wipe his feet and then dry it with my hair. No, this is the kind of emotion that is uncontrollable. And I just want to ask you, how would you feel if you're this person in this moment? Would anybody feel uncomfortable? Now let me ask you another question that kind of relates. How comfortable are you with just emotion in general? How comfortable are you, let's say, coming to church and just totally bawling your eyes out? I mean, in our world and in our life and in our culture, how much have we cultivated emotion? We talk a lot about struggling to feel God, right? I hear that all the time in our culture. I wonder if we don't just struggle to feel. I wonder if we just don't even know how to let emotion have its healthy course within our life. I find it so interesting that this woman comes to Jesus full emotion. She can't control it. She looks absurd. And then here's this Pharisee who's all buttoned up. And it's so telling. He responds to the story, well, I suppose the person whose debt has been most forgiven is the one who loves him. Do you see how they're both approaching Jesus in so different of a way? One is through her body, through her emotion. She's been brought to a point in life where she's low enough that all she has is her hunger for God. She doesn't have any Nutri-Grain bars left, right? There's no Twizzlers that she can snack on. Everything's been stripped away, and she knows, I need God more than anything else in my life. And then here you've got this Pharisee who's got his constant snacks of Nutri-Grain bars, right? Probably through the kudos that he received as a religious guy and his nice house, and all the things he had going on for him were like little pseudo snacks that sort of curbed his hunger. But we know that the hunger we were created for was more than just this life. We ache and long for something bigger. Just talk to anybody on their dying bed, saying maybe life is more than just what I did here. Maybe it's about a God that's bigger than anything I can control. And maybe my life could be more than just me. I mean, that's why you've got so many people in the world, myself included, who have everything they want and can still feel discontent inside. That's, as they say in a very cheesy way, a God-shaped hole. All of us have been built with this hunger. But see, life has a way of allowing us to protect ourselves from fully needing it. Emotions, I think, is one of the ways that gets us there. Learning how to feel, how to emote, how to feel sad and desperate. Can you imagine how desperate she must have felt to be crying in front of this religious group of people? By the way, the Psalms give us all kinds of ideas that our emotions are okay. Listen to these. These are just a few snippets that I picked out. Psalm 6:6. I'm weary from groaning, and all night I flood my bed with weeping, and I drench my couch with tears. Psalms 22:2. I cry out by day, O God, but you do not answer, and by night, but I still have no rest. How about Psalms 42:2-4? My soul thirsts for God, the living God. When shall I come and appear in God's presence? My tears have become my food both day and night, while men ask me all day long, where is your God? These things come to mind as I pour out my soul. Psalms 102:9. For I've eaten ashes like bread and mixed my drink with tears. Or Joel 2:17 that says, let the priests who minister before the Lord weep between the portico and the altar. The weeping was to draw out the emotion of the sadness of the disconnection between their people and God. I often wonder if my feeling God issues are not just a feeling, an issue altogether. This woman actually points away. And so I want to bring back that original question as we close. And that question is, which one do you relate to more? Do you relate to the Pharisee, whose life is kind of dull, whose life is manicured and controlled and protected from any emotion that would cause him to make a scene, and also therefore disconnected from his hunger for God? Or do you relate to the woman who is just desperate? She's gotten to the end of her rope, and she's come to a place where she does not care what those people think. She doesn't care that she's an outcast. All she wants is to connect with God in this moment. When I asked myself that question, I immediately felt guilty. Can I just be honest? I live with all kinds of voices in my head. And, a lot of times those voices are that I'm not doing good enough. And so I listened to this story and I thought, crap, here I'm doing it again. I'm like the Pharisee. I'm not like this woman. God, I'm so messed up. And then I realized this story is actually an invitation more than it is a judgment. Think about it. This woman had just come to the place where she was able to express on the outside what she felt on the inside. But my guess, if I ask you a different question, and that is, can you relate to feeling desperate on the inside? Can you relate to feeling like you're at the end of your rope and you don't know what the next step is? Can you relate to the emotion of, yes, I want more out of God. I want more out of life. I want to experience it, and I'm not, and I'm frustrated about that. I mean, if you can relate to having a situation that's just not going the way you want it to, and you're sort of pulling your inner hair out, if you will, then I would say you are actually at the place that woman was. We're all motivated in the same way. I think it starts with coming to grips with our own needs. See, I see that in my own life. I really do. And maybe you see it in your own. And if you do, then I'm just here to remind you, this is what we're after as a vineyard. We are hungry for God to show up.